Hello everybody, welcome to this week's episode of The County Seat. I'm your host, Chad Booth. Today we are privileged to spend our entire half hour with Congressman Jason Chaffetz. Congressman, thank you for joining us today.
Thanks for having me.
As we are sitting at the campus of the Utah State University Eastern here in Price, energy becomes a focal point of maybe where our conversation should reposit today. I'd like to start with a question and your reaction to the 100,000 acre lease that the BLM pulled at the last minute on oil and gas last year. What are your thoughts about that?
It's so unfair. People go through these processes to do it the right way, to get the proper approvals. There's no reason to just simply unilaterally go out and pull these leases. These leases are energy that we need, that the nation and the world is demanding to provide real jobs here in Utah that are some of the highest paying jobs that we have. There are clean, safe ways to extract these minerals and leases, or minerals and the coal and all these other things that we do here in Utah. There's just really no excuse for it because we need certainty, we need the energy, we need the jobs, but the BLM is just it's a little bit out of control, and you got a White House who just is bent on not developing energy here in the United States of America.
The BLM, when we questioned them about this, said that there were some last-minute protests about some things that hadn't been considered in all of the environmental studies that led up to it that caused them to make those last-minute decisions. In your mind, is there a procedural problem with the way this works if those sorts of last-minute things can derail a process that's been engaged for quite some time?
Yeah, I mean, hogwash to that. This is a process that goes through years and all sorts of resources and assessments and environmental impact studies and all, to suggest that at the end there was some missing part of the paperwork, I just don't buy it. They have a history and a record of pulling these leases at the last moment without much justification. It causes future investment to be hindered because of that uncertainty. I just don't buy it.
Well, there's some, not an official word, but there's some rumors that the reason operators like Bill Barrett have pulled out of Utah is because they can't seem to have any certainty on the future of energy development. Do you see that a trend that may be crippling to the entire West?
The reality is President Obama and the radical left, these radical environmentalists, have an agenda where they don't want to extract anything. They just don't simply want us to be energy independent. Now, we have North Dakota and other places that are thriving with development on private land, but on public property, there's also room for development. We have the resources. We have hundreds of years of coal here in Utah. We've got to be able to be energy independent. But you have a White House who sends out the signals through the BLM, the Department of Interior in general. They don't want to develop energy. It's really clear. It's not. They don't disguise it. It's part of their agenda.
So what would be some of the things that you could do? What directions could we take to kind of rein them in?
Well, number one, we got to make Harry Reid the minority leader instead of the majority leader in the United States Senate. We also got to get rid of President Obama as the President of the United States. That can't happen soon enough in my book. You've got to have somebody who's committed to making sure that energy independence is a priority for the United States of America. If we can do that, then you're going to start to see the development. And right here in Utah, when we have nearly 70% of our land that's owned by federal and state government, I believe in multiple use. There are pristine parts of the West that probably shouldn't be developed, but there are other parts that should be developed. I just believe in multiple use. I think that's where the majority of Utahns are. Let that happen at the localist of levels. Allow the counties to be part of this process and development and deciding what should be which. And then let's adhere to some of the history. Utahns care more about this land than some bureaucrat in Washington, D.C. We want to live in a beautiful place. We can do this ourselves.
So, short of the transfer of public lands, which is,
Well, that's the goal. I mean, that's where we ought to get to, yeah.
What are some of the steps that we could do in the interim to actually make that happen?
There are legal routes in which you can pursue. We as a delegation for people that hold office at the federal level have to continue to put pressure on the BLM and the Department of Interior. Rob Bishop and Chris Stewart, for instance, in the House have been wonderful on this side. Senator Hatch and Mike Lee are very vocal on this topic. But we have to continue to make the case and fight the fight.
You know, you mentioned coal, and coal has become a topic that most people in an elected position have become afraid to really talk about. I would like to, because your district has so much to do with coal, talk about coal for a minute, what your visions of its future are and what we need to be doing about it.
Look, the White House is waging a war on coal, and that should have been much more evident in the last election. It's not just us, but in Ohio and West Virginia and others, the President, the White House, the Democrats in general, they don't like coal, but it's a viable part of our future. There is a way to develop clean coal technology and do so in an environmentally friendly way. It's inexpensive and it's a big part of our future, and we should be pursuing that at every level. Accessing it on public lands, some of it that is found on private property, it's just a big part of our future, and we have to have an agenda that makes us energy independent. That should be the goal.
Do you have faith in a technological answer to the downsides of coal?
Look, I'm always amazed at how technology continues to improve. Whether it's the skis that you ski on or the energy that we develop, there are new materials being developed. But the reality is we can and should be energy independent. We have hundreds of years worth of coal just in Utah. And then you add on to the other states. This should be the imperative of the United States of America, and technology is going to keep driving us. Yes, we should continue to push for cleaner coal solutions, but let's not just abandon it overnight in favor of something that doesn't work, like solar. I want solar to be part of the mix, but it's got to stand on its own. And I want to stop burning our fuel, our food. The idea that what we're doing with ethanol, it really does concern me. Wasn't
there recently a report in the last couple of weeks that ethanol actually, they're rethinking it, and it's not as clean a fuel as they initially thought?
There was a U.S. taxpayer-funded study that went out there, and they determined that in the short term, ethanol is actually less environmentally friendly than other types of fuel. So is there perhaps part of the mix, in the mix for ethanol? Yes, but it doesn't need to be subsidized to the levels that it is. Let these different forms of energy compete in the marketplace, and you're going to have a better solution.
What can or should we be doing here in the state to try to develop our coal resources short of the pressure we're getting from the Department of Interior?
You've got to continue to press on the BLM and make sure that they're doing a fair and balanced process, that we're not just letting these leases be pulled. They need to know that there are going to be lawsuits galore fall down on them if they're going to pull these leases with no justification right as they get to the finish line, as we've had recent history for. But let's not give up on coal. Too many jobs, too much energy. It's a viable part of our future. It's part of our goal, I think, to be energy independent, and we should demand that from our office holders.
Excellent. Great place to take a break. We'll be right back with a conversation with Representative Jason Chaffetz in just a minute. Stay with us here on the County Seat.
Making sure your food is safe, it starts on the farm and continues every step of the way, all the way to your local grocery store. So when you bring home food for your family, you do so with the peace of mind that it's safe, fresh, and nutritious. Utah Department of Agriculture and Food, the guardians of Utah's food supply and sustainable agriculture. Visit ag.utah.gov for more information.
I didn't order this.
Compliments of the lady in gold.
Hello, trouble.
Anything worth doing in this quiet little town?
You look like the kind of man that could show a girl a good time.
You strike me as the kind of girl that likes a manicure and a massage.
How's that for a manicure?
I hate golf.
I was hoping for something a little more vigorous.
Vigorous, I can do.
And I thought you'd be riding side saddle.
What? I'm gonna regret this. How about that manicure?
How would you spend an extra day in Utah Valley? one more day. Visit utahvalley.com to make reservations. Utah Valley. Bring everyone together.
Welcome back to the county seat. Our conversation today continues with Representative Jason Chaffetz, and we are talking about energy. I'd like to shift our attention now and look a little bit about monuments. Another thing that this region is very concerned about started right here in the Price and Emery County areas when they were talking about monument designation under Governor Leavitt. But now we're looking at potential monuments in word from the administration that they want to go on a monument making spree over the next couple of years. What do we do about monuments? I mean, obviously this is not something your office is concerned about.
Well, there's two things. Fundamentally, it is just principally wrong that the chief executive officer or the president of the United States can unilaterally use the stroke of his pen, invoke the Antiquities Act, which is just, it's been contorted over the decades, use that Antiquities Act without any public input, without hearing anybody locally, and just take federal land and then designate it as wilderness. That's just patently unfair. I don't care if you're Democrat or Republican in office, that is a power that goes too far. And I think is without precedent, going back to its original intention. Over the course of years, it has morphed into something that is just untenable because there are potentially millions of acres that can be overturned. I'm working very closely with Rob Bishop and Chris Stewart to try to get the stakeholders at all ends of the political spectrum to participate with the counties in developing a process where we can not just swap lands, but come up with a package that will allow for certainty over the long period of time. There's nothing worse than going through this process and then at the end of it, all of a sudden it's just a flurry of lawsuits. And then there's, again, uncertainty into the program. So we want ultimately for there to be certainty. There are certain parts of Utah and the United States of America that are probably genuinely wilderness that we're not going to touch. And even if we didn't pass a bill, they would still be wilderness. But there are other parts that deserve multiple use that need to be designated as energy development that ought to be able to ride our ATVs and our bicycles on. The recreational community should be able to access things. I think there's an educational component. When people say, oh, we want to get out, we want wilderness, but do they realize they're not going to be able to drive out there? Do they realize that they're not going to be able to take a bicycle in certain parts of this wilderness? I think there's an education as to what wilderness truly is versus maybe what multiple use is. And I find that most Utahns, when they really think about it, study it, they want multiple use. And that ought to be our national objective. And that's what I'm working with Congressman Bishop and Congressman Stewart on.
Is there a possibility of, or a provision of a bill coming through that will actually stop the mass wholesale monument designation without local buy-in?
Well, part of what we're looking at and exploring and doing this is allowing the counties. Right now we're talking to 7 counties, maybe 8 if Daggett County comes on board. But we're looking at 7 different counties where they have a county-driven process as best we can. They're supportive of it. We'll include it in a bill, and hopefully we can add provisions like, for instance, a prohibition on the Antiquities Act. This does have historical precedent in that I believe it was Wyoming and Alaska that did this decades ago when they had some designations done for wilderness, but they got into the law that the president therefore would no longer be able to use the Antiquities Act to designate these monuments. We ought to be doing that in Utah. Let's learn from what Wyoming and Alaska did. I think that's the right solution for Utah as well.
Okay, very good. We're going to take a break here again. When we come back, we'll follow up with more of our conversation about excess federal lands with the Congressman. Stay with us. We'll be right back.
Kanab, base camp for your southern Utah adventures. You belong in Kanab.
Almost 45% of the oil produced in Utah, 7.8 million barrels, comes from Duchesne County. That oil feeds our state economy, provides job growth, and supports local business. Here in Duchesne County, we're working to make Utah an economic, cultural, and technological leader. Whether you're here for business or pleasure, Duchesne County will welcome you with open arms and invite you to explore all the beauty of the Uinta Mountains. Duchesne County, close enough for business, far enough to get away.
You go through the day-to-day repeating what you did yesterday. Don't you wish you could access that piece of your life that's missing? Find the beauty, serenity, family fun, or anything else that's missing from your life in the Cedar City, Bryan Head area. Gain access to your adventure, whether it's camping, hiking, the arts, festivals, or just a getaway. Visit ScenicSouthernUtah.com for details on all the adventures that you can access in scenic Southern Utah.
Welcome back to the county seat. Our conversation today with Jason Chaffetz, who is our congressman out here in this neck of the woods. We are bringing you this broadcast from the campus of Utah State University Eastern. It's a campus of 2,000 students where they get a really intimate education backed by the USU educational system. It's really quite a nice place
yeah,
to
it's beautiful.
have
Great day too.
It's a great day for it, I agree. So I would like to talk to you a minute about HR 2657 and the need to dispose of excess federal lands. Can you fill us in on this a little bit?
Well, fundamentally, what's gone wrong in this country is that we have acquired too much private property and made it public property. If you go back and look at the foundation of the United States of America, private property was a good thing. It was encouraged. That's part of the formation of the United States of America. Well, over the last several decades, the federal government has spent billions of dollars acquiring private property and making it public. Now, through this, back in 1997, under President Clinton, they did an assessment at the BLM, and they went and did an inventory of the land, and they had several different categories of this land, but they found that roughly 1% served no public purpose. That is, there was no right-of-way issue, there was no mineral extraction issues, and so we went back and looked at that study and said, well, if it serves no public purpose, based on the Clintons did, the Clinton administration did, the Democrats did, then let's sell it back. Let's make it, instead of public property, let's make it private property. Private property is a good thing. In Utah, that would be about 123,000 acres of land that would be put up for auction, and private individuals will be able to bid on that. Once it becomes private property, then it becomes part of the tax base without raising taxes, and that can help educate our children. So it's now made progress where we had a hearing, and then it went to the Committee on Natural Resources. Congressman Rob Bishop was a big help on this. It's now passed out of committee and has been referenced to the floor of the House.
What are your prospects on it?
Well, I'm not kidding. I mean, I don't want to overstate it. As long as Harry Reid is the majority leader in the United States Senate, it's probably not going anywhere, even if we did pass that out of the full House. So again, part of my goal is to make Harry Reid the minority leader, because he's an impediment to actually getting stuff done. Nevertheless, I think the principle's right. It shows that Republicans are behind this, and hopefully it can take on a bigger, broader scope. It doesn't solve all the problems. In the big scheme of things, it is a smaller portion, but it moves the ball in the right direction.
Do you see this as a strategy of, okay, let's chip away at the parts that have no dispute and say these should be in different hands, and then maybe say, okay, well, now let's look at these lands and do that inventorying again?
So the state of Utah, the state legislature, I think has a good strategy to invoke the Enabling Act, and it's a legal strategy to try to get the courts to recognize that the Enabling Act, when Utah became a state, was never fully executed, that the federal government didn't dispose of the lands back to the states as they were supposed to. And they should continue to pursue that, absolutely. But there are other things we should be doing. The legislation we're doing with Rob Bishop and Chris Stewart, this bill that would allow the excess federal lands on BLM property to be sold back. We need to pursue all of the above, and then I think we'd be going in the right direction, because right now we spend billions of dollars over the course of years acquiring private property and making it public. It's going the wrong direction.
Well, that's probably a good.
But we do more than our share here in Utah, I love it out here. This is where I'm raising my family. I love to go out on ATVs and go fishing and do all those things. I want to take care of the land, much more so than the people in Washington, D.C. who've never been here before.
Well, let me shift directions here a little bit and talk about a BLM report, because if we're acquiring more public lands into the BLM, there was a report that just came out in the last few days that said the BLM has studied this, and they say that the catastrophic fires that we're suffering in the West are more related to climate change than they are to management of the land. Would you like to address that for about 2 minutes?
This whole idea of global warming is a farce. It just is. It's just a farce. Look, they haven't properly managed the forest. I've got some maps that we need to get out there publicly that are really good that show the difference between private property, which is managed in a healthy forest capacity, as opposed to the federally controlled forests, some of it's BLM, some of it's national forest, that aren't cleared with their timber and whatnot. That's a bigger problem than what we're doing on private property. So they just have not managed the forests properly through the Department of Interior. It just hasn't happened, and consequently you get these big massive forest fires, which probably does more to throw particulates into the atmosphere than these coal-fired power plants. You solve the fire problem, you're going to do more to solve the problems of the particulates in the atmosphere than you are in attacking coal all the time.
Well, that's yet another good place for a break,
Okay.
but I'd like to follow up with a question on that right after we come back to this commercial break. Stay with us on the County Seat.
Landscapes as diverse as the people who venture to find them await. All you have to do is find a place to begin. Moab, Utah, in Grand County, where adventure begins.
I lived in Phoenix and then down in Orange County in California, and I met a small town girl and she brought me home. Just the smaller community that makes you feel like when you go somewhere you know everybody. You know, the sporting programs, the dance events, all these kinds of things, you run into people you know and that care about you and your family. And that makes it just a wonderful place to have little ones like this.
Isn't it time you found the balance you've been looking for? Uinta County, Utah. Color. It's something that can be seen. But have you ever wanted to reach out and touch it? Experience it. In San Juan County, Utah, color comes to life like nowhere else on earth. Color can be more than an abstract. Color can be your gateway to a new world. Visit San Juan County and explore the past, present, and future in a way that you've only dreamed of. San Juan County. Color your experience.
ATV? Check. Four-wheel driving? Check. Bouldering? Check. Mountain biking? Check. Hiking? Check. River rafting? Check. Adventure is about more than just crossing activities off of a list, but hey, if you can find a place that gives you everything you're looking for, all the better. In Emery County, you'll find the San Rafael swell, trails, lakes, and the small-town hospitality you're looking for. San Rafael Country, in the heart of Utah. Visit us and check something off your list.
Welcome back to the County Seat. We've been talking today with Congressman Jason Chaffetz. We've got one segment left in this show, and I think I'd like to turn our attention to the Endangered Species Act. We've recently seen an issue with the desert tortoise and cattle in Nevada that turned into a real debacle. We've seen issues with grazing allotments. There's an issue going on with sheep and the bighorn up in Idaho right now, and that's caused a reduction of 70% because of a potentially threatened species. Sage grouse looms in Utah. Is there something wrong with the law?
Yeah, because the only place the sage grouse should be listed is on the menu of a French bistro. It doesn't need to be federally protected.
You know, there are people that are just, that was an email starter. I'm going to hear some of that, but go on,
I'll probably get
Congressman.
some emails too. But most Utahns, I think, agree with me. Look, there are fundamental problems with the law. One is they don't take into account these animals that are living on private property. A lot of these animals are much like humans. They actually like to live where there's water and sprinklers and an abundance of water. So if you look at some of the problems that we're having with sage grouse and groundhogs and those types of things, you got to look at where the sprinklers are and you're going to find where the animals are. And so, for instance, down in San Juan County, where they are coming out preliminarily saying with the sage grouse that 90%, roughly 90% of the private property will now be encompassed if they were to list the sage grouse. I mean, that's just untenable. It's just not workable. They have done assessments on various species out there and not allowed the public to see that information. We had a hearing just a couple weeks ago, and that's where I was grilling the head of one of these departments and agencies to say, why don't you make that information public? He agreed that it was paid for with taxpayer dollars, then we should be able to see that information. The law goes too far. It's part of the Democrats' agenda. I know that's the tool that they use in order to prohibit development, but it just goes too far. It's just, when you live under that constant threat, particularly in rural communities, it's just fundamentally not fair.
Practically, is the best shot a tune-up to the law, or is a repeal possible?
Well, one of the things that's been terribly frustrating is that the law has not been authorized for a number of years, yet it continues to get appropriated and funded. So a lot of people, including myself, and I'm in Congress, don't understand why that has not been reauthorized, but money continues to be appropriated. And it's devastating into the West and particularly the Rocky Mountain region. And every time I go and to have a town hall meeting, people rightfully talk about how devastating this is. There were adjustments for the wolf up north, but I wish they had taken that delisting of the wolf throughout Utah, because I worry that the wolves are going to make themselves available. They're going to start coming south, and suddenly we're going to wake up to devastation of herds on, our elk and our deer, our sheep, our cattle. We're 80%, Utah, we're 80% livestock.
That's one of the interesting cases, because I looked at what they're doing with the sheep, and they're pulling them off of the ranges up in Idaho for the bighorn sheep. They say, well, they're making the wild sheep diseased and they're dying, and they go through all the other things that they list. They don't list the wolf, but the decline in the population has paralleled the wolf entrance into that community.
Wildlife needs to be managed, but it needs to be managed at the state level. And what I worry about is there's an agenda by some to manage species and wildlife at the federal level. That is not where the rubber meets the road. That is not the direction we can ever let that go. Let the state develop these management plans for the wildlife. We can balance all of the different needs, because you can't have a wolf get too out of control at the cost and the devastation of your elk herds. You can't allow the abundance of deer. Manage them at the local level. That's what the hunts are all about. One of the things that maybe if people aren't involved in the hunting industry, my guess is a lot of people who watch the show are, but what I find is that hunters and farmers and outdoor recreationists, they care more about the environment. They want healthy herds. They want a good ecosystem more than anybody. They've invested in this. Let them be part of that process, not some bureaucrat who's sitting in Washington, D.C. that thinks, wow, that sage grouse is beautiful, we need more of them. It's just not right.
Congressman, thank you for your time today.
Hey,
appreciate it very much.
Hey,
I know your schedule's busy. We thank you for inviting us into your home and being part of this conversation. We would like to hear your opinions. You can do that on our Facebook page. You can also get further comments and my opinions on this show by going to thecountyseat.tv, and we welcome your participation. We'll look for you next week on The County Seat. If you like this video, then we invite you to subscribe to our channel, The County Seat. You can do that here. And we invite you to share with your friends. We also invite you to get all the latest up-to-date information by following us on our social media channels. And if all else fails, make sure that you watch The County Seat Sunday morning at 8:30 right here on ABC4 Utah.